Hello, it's Wednesday, October 10th, 2018 at noon Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Special Edition. I'm your host, Andrea Boyle-Tippett from the University of Delaware. Today, we take a look back as PRSA's section dedicated to higher ed professionals celebrates its 20th anniversary. Our guests are a co-founder of PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education section and its current chair. Together, they have decades of experience working in colleges and universities. They'll share their hard-earned wisdom with us, and we'll also get insights from them on the current state of higher ed and what may be ahead for the industry. Today's Higher Ed Special Edition is part of the Higher Ed Live Network. Episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. We encourage you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts and questions via Twitter, and we'll discuss them during this hour. The hashtag to use is Higher Ed Live. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. You're on your way to becoming an experience mapping expert. You've got the tools, but now it's time to put them into action. When you understand what information your target audience is looking for, where they're looking for it, when they're looking for it, how they're searching for it, and why, you'll be able to identify areas for improvement in engagement, content creation, and so much more. Enter the M. Stoner Experience Map Workshop. They'll teach your team how to use experience mapping methodology to improve your marketing and communications, and you'll receive a fully customized experience map. Once you empathize with your experiences of your users, you can create and deploy content to enrich their user journey. We'll be tweeting out a link shortly. And all of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at Higher Ed Live, or you can take it on the go with you by just subscribing to the podcast. Today's episode is made possible by PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education Professional Interest section. Counselors to Higher Ed, or better known as CHE, provides PR professionals working in colleges and universities with a few things: publications, insights into the best ways to promote the value, power, and appropriate roles of communications and marketing functions within your institutions, and terrific networking opportunities and virtual events. So now let's chat with today's guests, Kurt Carlson and Matt Nagel. Kurt Carlson is a co-founder and former chair of PRSA CHE. He is now a member of the CHE Executive Committee Advisory Group. Before he retired in 2013, he enjoyed a 40-year career that included serving as chief communications officers at 4 universities: Emory University, University of Nebraska at Kearney, Illinois State University, and Berry College. His resume also includes stints as a business owner, a faculty member at 3 universities, and a radio broadcaster. He's also the author of a book chapter entitled Universities and the Business Practice of Marketing, and that was published in 2009. These days, he's an active member of the Oakley Society, a PR mentorship program at the University of Alabama. Our second guest, Matt Nagel, is an associate vice president for content and communications at Carnegie Mellon University. He's currently chair of CHE as well. Matt promotes Carnegie Mellon through dynamic storytelling that highlights the university's exceptional faculty, students, and staff, as well as their incredible research. Matt began his career as a broadcast journalist, but later found his passion for higher ed communications during previous stops at the Georgia Institute of Technology and New York University. Welcome, Kurt and Matt.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was a mouthful. Well done.
Thank you. Let's just jump into the questions. Let's take it back to the beginning. Kurt, what prompted the start of the PRSA group dedicated to higher ed professionals in the first place?
Well, this was about 20 years ago, since we're celebrating the 20th anniversary. About that time, I think that what prompted it was there was a general thirst among public relations leadership in higher education that wasn't really being met for many people through the existing professional organizations like CASE and a few others. They had seemed to veer off and put more emphasis on the development and the alumni side of things, with less programming than a lot of us would have preferred on the PR side. So there was a underlying thirst on the part of the public relations leadership for a forum for meaningful discussion of issues, of mainly of issues. And there was also, as I mentioned, this kind of controversy. Many of us reported to chief development officers, and we were chaffing a bit under that. And we looked at some of our colleagues who were direct reports to the presidents, and we were looking for a way that we could learn more about our profession and learn how we could uh, be more effective in our institutions and in the cliche that says we wanted to earn a place at the table. And then one way that the actual startup of it occurred in a kind of a accidental way. I had gone to a conference in Nashville of ECOS, which was then the section of PRSA that dealt with education and cultural organizations. And when I went there, it had been in place for a few years, but it was losing a lot of membership. Some of its board members were dropping out. And Milt Kapp, who was the present chair and about to roll off, they didn't have anybody else in line to chair that committee. And after the conference, we got to talking to Milt, and he said, "Would you be interested in being the chair of ECOS? If so, I'll put your name in." Since there was nobody else in the lineup, I said, "Well, I'll do it with one condition, and that is that we can repurpose ECOS to focus more on higher education." And that's really where it all started.
When you say, I mean, this may be an obvious question, but you say that you were chapping under the chief development structure. Can you describe that a little bit more and what your roles really were at the time as leaders of higher ed communications offices or communications functions?
Well, I think in recent years, especially, all of us in PR and higher ed have come to a profound understanding of the role, the proper role of public relations in higher education is in proximity to the CEO, the president, and the other top officers of the university. Uh, when you are working, as I had worked now, I worked, three of my experiences were at the three of the universities where I worked, I was reporting to the development officer. And of course, the development officer then gets to set your priorities. And I think fundamentally, I think about public relations as being an all-encompassing umbrella over all of the relationship type functions within the university, whether it's donor relations or community relations or federal or state relations, student relations, whatever. Just the way my brain processes, it's all about developing relationships with those publics, and who better at the art and the science of developing relationships but public relations professionals who've been trained as PR professionals. We look at the world, we look at the university, we look at society through a bit of a different lens from the fundraisers. I mean, they all have very important, legitimate roles, but when there's a crisis, for instance, are they going to make the best decisions for the institution overall, or is it going to be more limited to whether it's going to affect the attitudes of the donors? We, like, as PR people, we look at all the publics and not just the donors and not just the students and not just the community, but all of them.
Kurt, I want to follow up with something too, because you mentioned something, but I really want to kind of point it out, and that is, early on, you really did kind of see this group as a group that would have a bunch of senior counselors that would come together. And that was something that you thought about very intentionally back then. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Well, there were two reasons for that. One, we thought that if we were to repurpose ECOS as something else, which ultimately ended up as CHE, that we would be able to get the attention of the higher education community if we had the major universities involved in supporting it. And at that time, I was a member of the AAU Public Affairs Network, and that, as you know, is comprised of the 60-some of the top universities, research universities, public and private in the nation, all, you know, the most, supposedly the most prestigious higher education institutions in the state. So part of what we were doing is trying to hitch our star initially to the top universities, knowing that it would trickle down from there and other people would join other kinds of institutions. Well, as it turned out, we had a very good representation of people from the top universities who initially joined the group and came to our initial senior summit, but others from small liberal arts colleges, from community colleges, uh, all kinds of sizes and shapes, public, private, ended up very quickly coming on board with us because we were focused on issues of leadership, but not just for leaders, Matt. It was for those who aspired to leadership. So that was a big loophole that allowed just about anybody in the PR shop to join CHE and to get something there, get something out of it.
Matt, can you talk about what you've seen evolve over the years that you've been in higher ed communications?
I think the easy thing to point out is social media and how it's changed. I mean, it really is a 24/7 job as far as, being able to react in real time. There are, I think, increased expectations on how quickly you respond. And as we all know, the political environment that we know are in, it's also provides its own challenges and opportunities.
That's a very PR way of putting that, putting a nice spin on it. Let's talk about those challenges and opportunities in higher ed that might be different from other industries. And I see a lot of people come in at all various levels, from entry level to senior level, from other industries, and kind of go through a shell shock and not realizing what's different in higher ed that might be not similar in industries, whether they're nonprofit, government, corporations. Can you kind of talk about those specific challenges and again, challenges and opportunities?
I think part of the transition for anybody coming from a different industry is not always understanding that, at a corporate world, you can kind of say, hey, this is what we're going to do. If the boss says it, we all kind of get in line. And it's a shared governance, across the university. So not only do you have a variety of audiences and publics, but you also have a shared governance structure that allows, where you try to have to build relationships across campus to get things done, especially in a lot of these decentralized models. I worked at NYU and I'm now at Carnegie Mellon, are very decentralized. So the units throughout campus have established communication shops of their own that report up to the dean, and sometimes those can either conflict or don't necessarily align perfectly with something that the central office may be looking at. So it's a little different, I think, from that philosophy. To be honest, I'd be interested in Kurt's take on this as well.
Well, I don't think there's any surprise that this part of higher education has really stayed more the same, I think, than it has changed, although there are more corporate leaders and other non-higher education folks who are assuming leadership, who are trying and sometimes succeeding to bring much more of the corporate model to the management of higher education. But by and large, that's a very tough nut to crack, in that higher ed has been collegial, remains collegial for the most part, and it's a real shock to people from the outside when they get in and start observing what's going on. I'll tell a little story. At 2 or 3 of the institutions where I served, I would create what I would call a public relations or a public affairs advisory board. I would invite VPs and senior communications officers of surrounding major corporations. So I had VPs from everything from UPS to Coca-Cola, a lot of the big companies. And one day we were walking across campus after a meeting where we shared a lot of the issues. This particular issue, I don't remember the specifics, but it was something about the faculty, and they were misbehaving, you know, according to outside, and faculty do misbehave from time to time. And she was telling me, well, why doesn't the president just tell the faculty that this is it, this is what it's going to be? And I had to explain to her, well, you know, when the president says that to faculty, they usually take that as a clue to do the exact opposite. And that's a big difference.
Were there any takeaways that you got from that advisory group that did move from the corporate world into higher ed that you see as beneficial, or just in general takeaways from other industries that are beneficial in higher ed?
Lots of them. I had the feeling, very distinct feeling, after a while, that the most enlightened corporations are moving more towards a collegial model of higher education at the same time that higher ed is adopting some of the practices of corporations, such as marketing and branding and planning in a way that you know, universities haven't always been as good at planning as some of the corporations that have a very specific profit-inspired goal. So that was one thing that struck me, and I gained a real deep appreciation for a lot of these corporations and how they worked and what we had in common. And they too gained a lot of appreciation for the value of the collegial model that we tried to operate under.
We discussed this in our preparation for the webinar, but what do you see as the correct role of marketing within higher ed?
Matt or me?
You.
Matt.
Not to sling arrows in any way at individuals who are more marketing focused than communications focused, but you know, it's a little bit of a different rodeo for people who are in marketing in higher ed versus communications.
Well, we could spend about 2 hours talking about definitions here and how things have changed in branding and marketing and whatnot. Going back to my days at Illinois State University, I was trying to bring about, and did bring about, what we didn't dare call it a marketing or branding effort. It was an institutional identity project where we wanted to get rid of the old seal-based logo and bring in something that was a little more modern and easier to reproduce and all of that. Well, as in part of doing that, I was going around and visiting with a lot of the faculty and department chairs, and one department chair in particular, we were trying to change simplify the logo from an old English version of Chaucer's Gladly Will We Teach and Learn. I can't even pronounce it in Old English, but that was the equivalent name for it. He said, well, what we're trying to do here is gladly teach and market. He was just making fun of our whole effort because we were managing to use the word marketing. Well, now it's not like that. I mean, universities, all of them that I've had any dealings with in more recent years, have embraced many of the principles of marketing wholly, and I think appropriately. But I think it's for us as PR professionals to make sure that we understand that this is not a substitute for the practice of public relations and the counseling role that we all need to bring to our practice.
Matt, do you have anything to add there?
You know, I think more and more we're just coming to an integrated approach where, you know, the two work hand in hand. You know, we're always trying to find those stories that really amplify the brand. and amplify, key messaging that the university wants to get out. And I do think, in a digital world, we're going to see more and more where there's, direct digital marketing for different things, not just students, but, the research enterprise and those types of things. So I think kind of understanding all aspects of the communication landscape and making sure that it is an integrated approach is really important.
The first few years of my practice, it was all about promotion. We didn't call it marketing, but it was promotion. We were trying to figure out the best technologies, the best vehicles, the best media for promoting the college or the university. Even at Berry College, I had an offer from a billboard company to give us several hundred free billboards. Well, oh my Lord, you would have thought we had just jumped off the ship completely, because who thought that a college would need to advertise on billboards for every, my goodness. Well, we did, and it ended up, brought people on board, and it had a very positive effect. And we didn't sell our soul because we put billboards up around the region. So there you go. You just have to have it in perspective, keep everything in perspective.
Can you talk about, all this leads me to think about the need to influence internally and promote the value of the work that we all do, but also kind of shift things, like you said, with the English chair. Do you have any tips or tricks or things that have worked over time as far as being an internal influencer?
Are you waiting? I'm sorry, Andrew. You want Kurt or me? I'm sorry.
Either of you can happily chime in. Whatever. If there's anything that has, it's more of a tactical thing. Anything that's worked, any lines you've used, anything to make internal influencing more productive. Because I find that as time has evolved, people are internally at an institution more aware of things like marketing and branding, but also there's those individuals who are not. And I just didn't know if you had any insights on that.
I have a short comment about that, and that I always try, when I go to a new institution, I think the most important thing that a new PR person can do is to devote the first month or two or more to filling up your calendar with going out, making appointments, and going out and meeting faculty, administrators, department chairs, students, meeting everybody who will give you the time to sit down and chat with them, and try to explain to them right off the bat what you're all about and how you are there to support them. That's the role of the public relations office. And when they see you as an ally, then some of the defensiveness that they may have had will hopefully melt away a bit.
Great.
Yeah, I completely agree with Kurt on that as well. I think, I think getting out and really listening in your first few months is really key. I think ultimately trying to come up with, a shared set of standards for content and for, other ways that you're going to try to express your brand, I think are important. In the end, I think a lot of it is just kind of figuring out where the gaps are and how you can fill the gaps, as well as amplify what others are doing across campus. So for me, I think, you're always trying to tell those institutional stories. And a lot of times those take everybody collaborating together to really tell well. So I do think that, making sure that you do build those bridges across campus is essential to your success.
I do want to remind viewers that if they have any questions, they're welcome to tweet at us using the hashtag HigherEdLive, so we can ask those questions while the conversation continues. I do want to shift now to some leadership type questions. As time has gone on, what is the greatest piece of advice that you have ever received about leadership?
Wow, that is a tough question, Andrea.
That's what I'm here for. I just wanted to grill you guys. To be fair, I gave you the question beforehand. I was a good PR professional, and then I prepped you to the questions I was going to ask.
Let me forward a piece of advice that I got one time from Pat Jackson, who was the famous Pat Jackson, now deceased, who was very much involved and instrumental in helping us with the creation of CHE. And one thing that he said to me and to the group memorably was that take it upon yourself to be the creator and the keeper of data. And when you do that, and you actually know from your research what your publics are thinking of you and how they are behaving towards you, and you become the source of that knowledge and the keeper of that knowledge, then your colleagues are going to come to you. It's not a matter of you seeking a place at the table, it's them seeking you out for your knowledge of what's going on. I think that's a great piece of advice. Whether I've always followed that or not is up for debate, but I thought it was a great idea.
Talk about the data that you've used. Where was the data 20 years ago, and what was the data toward closer to your retirement?
Ooh.
I don't need the numbers, just the ideas of what what those numbers represented.
I'm trying to think what I'll mention one of the more interesting research projects that I was involved in and took the leading role in from the campus perspective, and that was at Emory a few years ago. We became very interested in what are the pillars of a university's reputation. What is it that makes a university a Harvard, for instance? I mean, we can all kind of click off those institutions that have managed to develop a very powerful reputation. What is it that makes that up? And so we went through a long, very expensive research project that was run by Burson Marsteller, the big PR firm. And we spent almost a year coming up with that. And I found that to be very interesting. And out of that, we developed a communications marketing plan that focused on what we knew would be the reputational elements that would help build the institution's reputation. So it gave us a real strong, very helpful guide for developing actual on-the-ground practice.
And that was a proprietary thing that you all did at Emory, right? That's not something that's available somewhere for people to take a look at.
It was never published. It was always proprietary. And, you know, sometime over here, I'll tell you what those pillars are.
I will keep you to that for sure.
You can just imagine what they are.
Let me ask a related question, and then Matt, you can get back to us about what the best advice that you've gotten is. There was a new Gallup poll that just came out that shows a dip in public confidence in higher ed institutions. Does that surprise you? And also, what do you think that PR professionals can do to move that needle back in the right direction?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, and I can give you a bit more context. There was a Gallup poll. It was there was a story on it yesterday in Inside Higher Ed that Gallup found that the American public has seen a decline in their confidence in higher ed institutions, and it was actually the biggest decline in any industry that they were studying in the past few years. Higher ed's standing is still kind of in the middle range. It's not as good as the military and small businesses, but it's better than the presidency, the Supreme Court, the medical system, banks, public schools, etc. What do you think might be leading to that decline in public confidence, and what could be done to combat that by the folks on this webinar and others in offices like ours?
I think it's probably, you know, some of it is the tough issues that are for our industry right now, whether it be student debt, you know, some parts of the public maybe feeling like they aren't able to get into some of the premier institutions. And so making sure that we're able to make the connection to our audiences in a way that they can feel a connection to us, you know, a deep connection, for lack of a better term. I think better telling our stories, you know, making sure that we actually show the connection between how research does impact everyday life. I think, you know, making sure that we have our leadership weighing in on policies that are important for higher education in a way that's meaningful, in a way that people understand why it's important to us. And I think standing behind our values of inclusivity, as well as you know, academic freedom, and making sure that we're you know, continuing to remind folks of why these institutions are important. You know, a lot of times we get lost because, you know, by the time, you know, an advance in technology gets to the marketplace, people don't always remember how many different, you know, advances in research that we had to have to get to those technologies. You know, with those, the transfer of technology kind of pace becoming more rapid and the marketplace kind of timeline shrinking, I think we're getting to a place where we can better tell some of those stories. And at Carnegie Mellon, frankly, that's what we're trying to do.
Kurt, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I could say this. I think that we would, thinking back in my career, one of the first books that I remember, and I know there were more before this, but the one that really caught my attention that I thought had a terrible effect on higher education was Prof. Scam. I don't know if you remember that or read it, but it was a diatribe against the faculty and claiming that it was a cushy job, the tenure was outdated, that professors were doing all this foolish research on the public dime. I mean, it was a full Monty attack on higher education. And in the wake of ProfScan, there's been a lot of other books that would criticize higher education. I think that that's had a toll, and I think we also have to recognize that part of this decrease in the reputation and the standing of higher education in this culture is because of the overall societal split. I don't think we can really ignore that, and the what I call the attack on science, which is very real and is out there for everybody to see. All of those things are chipping away at higher education. To say nothing about what Matt mentioned, the student debt that's related to the increasing cost of tuition and the decreasing support for higher education by the state legislatures over the last, as long as I can remember. So all of those things add up, and it's just a death by a thousand. What's that metaphor? I can't even remember the metaphor now.
Death by a thousand cuts.
There you go. There you go. Thank you to my rescue. So I think that all of that is adding up, and I don't think it's inevitable. I think there's I don't think it's going to be the demise of higher education. I think higher education is going to come out of this okay.
That's good to have in the back of my mind and hope for the best. So part of what I was reading about this Gallup poll is that simultaneously there's a new president at Harvard, and he was making some comments similar to why there's eroded public trust. And one of the things he said was that there's a perception that higher ed is out of touch with the rest of America. And I'm wondering how that kind of plays with a lot of the First Amendment issues and the protests and kind of the interest that students have in social justice that's being played out on college campuses nationwide. Can you talk about what you've seen in that arena as far as, like I said, protests and speaking up, and how communications offices are doing well at dealing with that or not doing well at dealing with that, if you have any insights there, or if that was even a question. It went on for a long time. Sorry.
Matt, you start on this one.
You know, I think it's one of those things that every campus is grappling with. I think every situation is a little different. You know, when I was at Georgia Tech, the campus kind of community was a little different than when I was at NYU. Our students were a little more active at NYU, and I think we encouraged it. You know, you want folks to be able to freely express ideas. I think the thing that we're grappling with is making sure that you can create a safe environment and that there's no safety risks for campus. But making sure that we're able to have a free discourse and exchange of ideas, I think, is at the foundation of what every university is and ought to be. So, I think from our standpoint, I think it's making sure that we communicate, how that's done without, interrupting the business operations of the university, making sure that students understand that, that their voice is a valuable one and that it's heard, and there are different ways to do that. It can be through town halls or small groups, meeting with leadership. But just, I think, trying to make sure that you keep those types of conversations open, and more than anything, probably making sure that you're aware of those conversations and things that may be going on, and issues that may be bubbling up, both on the local kind of campus level, but also on the national level.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think it's one of the most difficult challenges that a president or a chancellor has uh, of dealing with. And it goes back to some of the basics of good public relations and relationship building, is that the better, you don't want your first conversation with the student government leadership to be in the middle of a crisis. You want to be there and know those people, and they get to know you, and you kind of develop a trust, so you have some allies when things get to be really difficult.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the question about the greatest piece of advice you've ever received. Matt, you're not going to shirk that one.
You know, I've had a lot of good advice, but I think two in particular stick out to me, and that is, always have a strategy and a plan. That was one thing that one of my bosses said to me, and it really kind of got me thinking about kind of the larger scale strategy, and how to advise and counsel a president and leadership on those types of things. But really, the one that sticks out more than anything to me is actually have a mentor and be a mentor. I think that's how I've learned the most. And to be honest, that's how Counselor of Higher Education has probably helped me the most. I have people in my life like Don Hale and Michael Warden, Joe Brunnen, and others that have really been great colleagues and mentors to me throughout my career. And I hope that I'm returning the favor to others in the field as well.
I will just do a plug there. If anyone would like to become a member of PRSA CHE, we will tweet out a link after this webinar so that you have the opportunity to do so.
I'll add one additional plug there, Andrea, and that is right now, we are always needing volunteers to help, because what makes CHE so great is the programming that we're able to put on, both at the conference level as well as these monthly webinars. And other forms of content, whether it be communications through our social media channels or newsletters. And it all starts with the volunteers. So I just would ask that those that are CHE members look to get involved. Those that aren't CHE members, join and look to get involved. We can always use additional folks in, and that's what makes Counselors of Higher Education so great, is kind of that diversity of thought and perspectives on issues.
I can say this too, Andrea, that CHE, without a doubt, has been the most important professional development organization or activity that I've been involved in. It has made a tremendous amount of difference, I think, in my outlook, my practice, and I would, when we, a small group of us were getting this thing going, I think we originally had like 30 or 40 people at our first senior summit, which was a planning summit. Now, what's the membership? 700, something like that. I mean, I think we must have struck a chord with a lot of people, because it's been so much fun to see this group grow and become more and more relevant over the years.
Fantastic. I piggyback on what both of you have said. I've found it to be incredibly helpful and fulfilling to be involved with CHE. Another question to do a look back and look at the current state of things. What are the greatest differences in communicating with current and prospective students in your mind now versus 20 years ago? Or as long as your history goes back.
Oh my goodness, I don't think you want to go back to the days of the film strip and the slideshows. That's what was going on when I started in higher education. Now, I have to say, Matt and Andrea, that it is all about social media and connecting over social media. Social media had come of age during my last couple of positions, and I think our group at both institutions was struggling kind of figure out how to use it and how to make it work for them. I think there have been lots of just as an observer, and it's nice to be just an observer now, having retired a few years ago. Uh, it, it's really interesting to watch how institutions are maturing in their use of social media, and I think that maturation will continue as the technology evolves.
I think the one thing that I would say that I've just seen change is the number of tools. We have so many different tools to tell our stories now, whether that be through social media, whether that be through video. I mean, even if you break down video, you can do, really short video on social media. You can do the longer form video. You can put somebody on camera to help folks that may be a little less comfortable in front of the camera, to help them ease there and have a little bit more of a robust conversation that's natural and casual. There's a lot more, I think, things available for communicators to kind of, from a tactical level, try to reach those target audiences.
So we have a question from Twitter from Pete McHugh, who's in New York City. And he says, how can we as communicators do a better job of showing the value of higher education? I'm going to make the assumption that he means the value of investing thousands of dollars in an education. Thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. I don't think that there's necessarily one way. It kind of goes back to what I was just saying, how there's, we've got all these different tools. I think you're starting to see a lot of organizations, including Counselors to Higher Education and AAU and others, really starting to look at how we can all work together. I think that may be one thing that we can do a better job of, is not only individually from a campus standpoint and from a university standpoint, but how can we collectively as a higher education industry better tell our story and make sure that we're getting kind of the successes out there that make us so valuable to the general public. You see that from publics to privates as well. I mean, public universities maybe feel a little bit more of an obligation to go, and I know when we were at Georgia Tech, we would target our legislatures, different districts, and try to really explain what the value is. And I think maybe as a private, we can take some of those lessons and really try to fine tune them ourselves, because I think there's a value in all of the higher education industry really being able to let the general public know what our benefit is. I'm not sure I quite answered Pete's question, but I do think that there's a variety of ways we do it. I don't think there's any one kind of, one item that would solve the issue.
From a purely numbers point of view, I think it's still true. I don't have the data in front of me. I haven't looked at it for a while, but just from a purely numbers point of view, your income, lifetime income as a college graduate is exponentially higher than that of a high school graduate, if you're just looking at the numbers. I think that's still true, and that's very hard to use just data to convince students who are loaded with $100,000 worth of debt when they get finished with school. That's really the big elephant in the room for them, and I understand that, because it should be. But there are other benefits. I've been instrumental and have observed also economic impact. The university in the community makes a huge impact economically as well as socially, and those kind of things can be measured. The trouble is, when you do those studies, it's very hard to convey the emotion of all of that. It's not just facts. Facts don't convince. It's personal experiences that will convince. And so it's a tough question, and it's one of the challenges that we all have, and I should all be working on.
I think, kind of going back to what Kurt said, I think some of this goes back to being able to tell those stories in a really compelling way. It goes back to having all those different channels. You can have all those channels, but if you're not telling the story that is really going to connect with your audience, then maybe you're not doing it justice. So, telling the inclusivity story on campus in a compelling way, making sure that you're talking about accessibility in ways that, students have been able to come in and afford your institution in a way that maybe some wouldn't realize. So I think some of that is just telling those stories and really digging down into the weeds to be able to tell those in a compelling way, and then using those platforms and those outlets to make sure that you're amplifying those to reach the audience that you're trying to target.
I can piggyback on this and say that two different things that popped up during this conversation. We've just recently tactically had happen here at the University of Delaware. One was an economic impact report. We are a state institution, and so we had one of those done by an outside group and convey that to the media. We're also still continually exploring other ways to share that information, because you can say, for every $1 that the state of Delaware invests in the university, we return $23 to the economy, but that doesn't mean a lot to the general public, as Kurt noted. But it is one of those things where there is a lot of value in it, and collaborating with the government relations teams to see how we can share that specifically with legislators in their own, about telling stories about their own districts and how their districts are impacted. It's alumni in the community. It's the number of students. We've even gone to talk about the number of student athletes who come from each district. And then on the other side, the awareness of how important it is for prospective students and their parents to understand the outcomes of their education. So we've developed and promote a website dedicated specifically to outcomes for graduates of every single one of our majors. And we've seen some good success with that, because it's so important for parents to know, you say, oh, your kid's going to get a good job, but if you can show, oh, your kid's going to make this much out of school, and this many of our graduates are 6 months out and have either a job or have continued on to grad school, that's a little bit more tangible. But again, I agree with everyone that it's getting back to telling the human stories behind all those things, and showcasing stories of alums who are doing really cool things and have a great job, in part because of their education from your institution. So now there is actually another question from Twitter. So I'll grab that really quickly. And it is from Lance Kistler. And it says, when setting up an external advisory group, should need media be considered? Do you have them sign an NDA, step out of the room, or just be part of a group in case you discuss sensitive topics? I'm not sure I understand the first sentence. I think it was probably a typo about need media, but the question, I think, at its heart is about confidentiality in an external advisory group.
I can tell you what worked for me, in that we did not invite media into the advisory group, just for that reason, because it was confidential discussions. And one of the reasons why it worked, why we got really good advice, was because we promised these top executives from around the region that we would have a no-holds-barred discussion of the issues as we were facing them. They felt like they were really there with us, and were able to understand what we were grappling with in a way that you can't from the media. And obviously there are a lot of sensitive issues, whether it was race or same-sex marriage in university chapels, or on and on and on. All of those things have a very personal dimension. And we weren't looking to publicize what we were doing there. We were just asking for it and trying to involve some people with a public relations communication background for their honest and wise advice on where to go with some of these things. So no, I would not include the media, but I would open it to other people who are proven communicators.
Did you go as far as having people sign a non-disclosure agreement, or was it more of a verbal?
No, they understood. People at that level, if you're a vice president of a major corporation, you're going to understand the grammar. We never had any trouble with that.
Excellent. So I think my final question of the day is about the future. What do you see coming that should both possibly scare, but hopefully excite members of our community about higher ed comms?
Wow, scare or excite? Andrea, I tell you the questions today.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'll try. I need to soften them up a little bit. But I mean, just in general, what do you see coming in the future? I know it's hard to have a crystal ball, but there's definitely opportunity if you take the positive outlook to the future, which I tried to do. What do you see?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that's kind of where we're all at in the communication field, whether you're in the higher education industry or just another end of the communication spectrum. It's all the different channels. It's the different ways that we can do. And again, my background is in broadcasting, and so at my very core, I think it's about storytelling. And I think the ways that we're able to tell stories and allow, whether it be different technologies through social media or just ways that we're able to engage audiences in meaningful ways. I mean, we didn't get into a lot of it, but the way that you're able to even do a digital marketing campaign and really target an audience, to me, these are a lot of the opportunities that I think people will continue to kind of hone in on and figure out how they can use them for different ways to enhance our communication efforts in higher ed.
The future, as I see it, is almost entirely through the lens, through the eyes of our 4-year-old granddaughter. The reason we came to Alabama is because her mother was appointed a faculty in the School of Social Work, and here we came along with them. But we're with our 4-year-old a lot, and you got to think about her future and what is she facing. When you see her whiz through an iPhone, and she's been conversing on the iPhone for at least the last couple of years, you wonder what in the world is the future going to be for her, and is she going to be able to learn more about life than what you can learn by swishing back and forth on an iPhone or surfing the net? So I have great hope and great optimism, but also there's a lot of worry about maybe the world is going to be so different that it'll be tough on her. I don't know. We'll have to see. But I do know that PR people have a great and important role in helping to shape the future of higher ed.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we will end. I want to thank our guests, Kurt Carlson and Matt Nagel, for joining us. And thanks as always. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks as always to our program sponsor, PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education. Don't forget to follow us and engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We appreciate you joining us for this special edition of Higher Ed Live. Have a great afternoon.